Heard a story today about a Buddhist monk. Um, I won't go into all the details. I don't actually have all the details, but I guess it's an old story about a Buddhist monk who was trying to have a child with his wife, and they tried for a long time, and they kept having a lot of stillbirths and just weren't successful in having a child. And eventually, they did. They did have a child, and I forget exactly how old, but at a relatively young age, younger than 10, the child passed away. And the point of the story was that this Buddhist monk who spent such a good part of his life, in many ways, training his mind and his soul and his spirit to understand what life really is, and this idea of impermanence, right? Nothing in life is permanent. Um, People die, things change, suffering, pain is part of life, and the ideal being to get to that perspective, to, in some ways, and this is my words now, kind of detach yourself from it, to know going into it that these things are going to happen so that they don't devastate you as much, so that you're not as emotionally tied to them and kind of being pulled in these different directions. You can kind of stay even keel and understand that this is all part of life. And conceptually, logically, all of that makes sense. And that was the spirit of how this Buddhist monk felt, because he actually wrote a poem after his child died. And the spirit of the poem was exactly that. It was, I understand these concepts. I understand what I've learned over the years and the wisdom and what life is really about, and that these types of things are expected, and that we should, in some ways, be prepared for them. He should know how to handle it. But he said, in the line that stuck with me from the poem was, but even so, but even so, even though I know all these things, I understand how life works, even so, it's still hard. And now this is me kind of speaking, but using that as a jumping off point. That resonates with me so deeply on so many levels, because much of what I'm trying to do is much like that Buddhist monk in some ways. I'm trying to gain that perspective. I'm trying to gain wisdom. I'm trying to, for me individually, there's a deep logic to how I try and apply how I think, how I feel, the actions I take, the decisions I make, and you should understand it. But even so, even so with that, it's hard. It's really hard. It should seem simple. It should seem easy. It should seem, we understand what life is. We understand the pain and the suffering. We understand what makes us feel good, what makes us feel bad, how to have a healthy mindset. But even so, bad things happen. Things don't go our way. Hard situations arise. And it's just hard. It's hard for us to actually live in accordance with that and to truly embody it. The logical understanding applies to this, because that but even so, that's illogical, right? There shouldn't be a but even so. It should be, if we know this to be true, if we know this is the right way to live and the right way to handle it, then just go do it. That's logical. We know that. Just go do the logical thing you know you need to do, but we're humans. We're imperfect. But even so, we know the logical approach. We can't always do it. And what really fascinates me about that concept, because I think for a lot of people that would resonate, like, yeah, we're imperfect. Of course, it's hard. What does that really mean? What does that really say? What is but even so? What does that really mean in this context? There's a view I have, which would mean I understand all of that, but even so, I still think this is the better way to do it. That's kind of my underwriting view of life and how we function and how our minds work, that we do what we want to do. We're not always aware of that, explicitly. We don't always want to admit it. Sometimes it's under the covers. But take this example, right? Something horrible happens in your life, a child passes away, whatever it is. You know logically how you should handle that, the right perspective to take, what it all means, etc., etc. But even so, you find yourself still devastated and crushed and upset and struggling to deal with life and struggling to deal with struggling. But even so, that that part of it, to me, that just means you've decided that's the better way for you to handle it. And better is a very loaded term there, but it's better for you. And whatever that means. Maybe it's less painful in a weird way. Maybe it's more therapeutic. Maybe it's easier. Maybe there's something about being human and feeling those emotions and not being detached that you think is net positive for you in your life. Whatever the reason is, you've made a decision to take that approach. And I think that holds for all of us in these but even so's, right? I know I should be healthier. I know I should do this, but even so. I know I should, do a better job at work and get promoted and do a better job, trying to get ahead in life, but even so, right? All these but even so's that seem to be paradoxes. They seem to be like, it just doesn't logically make any sense. I actually do think there's a deep logic there. I don't know that we always like the logic, but I do think there is a deep logic. And it's all intertwined with things that are very difficult for us to understand, how our emotions work, what suffering really means, the loss of a loved one, what does it really mean in the grand scheme of the universe and all that. We don't understand all of that. But we have to make decisions. And we make decisions based on the best knowledge and logic we have of what we think is going to be best for us. So it's just a really interesting thing to think about for me, this idea that we can understand something and know how we should handle it, but even so, it's still really hard and we don't want to do it. But then you go another level underneath that and say, well, maybe there's still some logic there. I don't know. That's just kind of how I see it.